Good morning, everyone. Welcome. And once again, thank you for joining us here at the Blue Lotus Meditation and Mindfulness Center for our bi-weekly live Dharma talk. So I appreciate it for you spending some of your time with us this morning. Today is January 19th. It is 6:30 a.m. here in the Central Time Zone where we are in exceptionally cold Brainerd, Minnesota this morning. It is what they say is like minus 25 degrees Celsius outside. So imagine how cold that is. If you're not familiar with that, that's probably, if you use the Fahrenheit scale, it's probably around minus 10 or so, something like that, I guess. Super cold. So if you are in this area, be sure to stay warm and so forth. Right? Don't go outside if you don't need to. We're very cold. Come and sit and listen to these Dharma talks if you desire. Just a brief announcement. We do have our ongoing YouTube channel memberships. It's a wonderful way for you to to continue to support our meditation center and teaching of the Dharma. You help both yourself and communities, right? People throughout the world learn and experience the Dharma. If you have watched any of the monks that are doing their walk for peace, right? Look at all the wonderful people that have never experienced the Dharma or monks or Buddhism, and they are getting a glimpse and they're finding joy and peace in their heart. And so that is one small way that you can help support our efforts in sharing the Dharma for those needing it. And at this time, we also want to thank our supporting channel members as well. So before we begin, or as we continue, I should say, right? We'll start with the three jewels. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. All right. And so tonight's topic is discovering your true, or this morning's topic, discover your true, authentic self. And we hear that phrase very often, our authentic self. I am being authentically me. Right? Things along those lines. And so we have to really examine what that is, because we know that in Buddhism, right, the term self, right, or no self, or perhaps even the big I and the little I, right, ego, and then what is below that ego, what is authentically us. And so we will explore that this morning, what it really means to be authentic ourselves, and how the Buddha's Dharma teaches us how we can really, start to just unravel or peel away those layers of ego, our conditioned thinking, to explore what it really means to be us, right? What is really beneath that. So, but before we begin even more, let's take a moment to just settle in, all right? Go ahead and gently bring your attention to your body and feel where you're sitting, right? Simply noticing your breath. No need to change it. Just simply notice it. It's going to be an important aspect, right? Just kind of allowing our bodies to experience the situation, where we are right here and right now, remembering that there is no past and there is no future. There's only this one infinitesimal little moment that is constantly in motion, right? That we can never do anything. And so often we move through life simply asking, who am I really? And this morning we'll explore how Buddhism and the Dharma respond to that question, not by giving us a new identity, but by freeing us from the ones that cause suffering. And many of us feel that we somehow have drifted away, right? Whether we've drifted away from our authentic self, right? We might say, I don't feel like myself anymore, or I don't know who I am without this role. That's an important one, right? Who am I without this role? Because it means we have identified, right, with some type of a position, right? Or perhaps we may even feel, or may even say that I feel disconnected from something real. I said, think about that. Something tangible, something important, in this world. Um, and somebody's feeling disconnected. In fact, a lot of um, people who suffer through depression might feel disconnected, right? Sometimes people who cause self-harm to themselves, right? They are feeling disconnected from the world or from something real. So sometimes we ask those questions, right? And this is why it's important. Um, this talk is really important, this morning, right? And so we can alleviate that and really try to figure out, removing those layers of illusionment that cause us to be disillusioned or even disconnected. And so in modern culture, we're often told that authenticity means expressing ourselves more, defining ourselves more clearly, or even standing out, right? So think about when we see a lot of videos, especially on shorts or threads, perhaps, maybe even TikTok, somebody's saying, I'm being authentically me, but they're rude and crass, right? They cause suffering in how they speak to others. Not always, right? That's not always the situation. Sometimes we find people, perhaps they may be living off grid, right? Just enjoying, simple farming life. And that's fine. But if expressing ourselves makes us authentic, and that expression is rude or crass or undisciplined, is that really you? Right? So that's something to think about. And so the Buddha had a very different approach, right? And so instead of asking us to define the self, right, he asks us to examine experience carefully, right? So we have to examine whatever that experience is or our experiences very carefully. And he taught, this is not mine. This I am not. And this is not myself. Right? So those are our experiences. And so when we examine, pick experience, anything that you've had in your life, good or bad or neutral. Maybe it was a promotion at your workplace. Maybe you even got fired. Right? Or maybe it was just one of those run-of-the-mill days where it's like, wow, it's kind of dragging on today, right? Nothing bad or nothing eventful necessarily happened, or nothing remarkable during that day. And so we cling on to a lot of those ideas, right? We cling on those experiences, right? And allowing them to identify or dictate who we are. They add additional layers. But when we think about what the Buddha just described, this is not mine. This I am not. And this is not myself. Right? Pretty profound words. And so at first, this sounds almost radical to some degree, right? Even uncomfortable, right? Because we're allowing that situation to dictate who we are. But what the Buddha was offering was not loss, it's liberation. Because when we feel that, or when we understand that, whatever that experience is, it isn't yours in the sense that it's a possession, like a pencil, right? Or a coffee mug, right? It's not yours in that type of a possession, right? It's impermanent. And so, and that brings us to the next part, right? Thinking about authenticity versus conditioning, right? So let's reflect for just a brief moment. Most of what we think of as me, right, or you, is actually something that you've learned, right? We have learned how to behave to be accepted, right? Have you ever heard somebody say, oh, that's not how girls behave, or that's not what good girls do, or are you a good boy? That's what good boys do, right? What emotions were allowed? How often do we find men, for example, holding back tears because they feel that and they've been taught that, conditioned that men don't cry, right? But we expect women, right, to be emotional. But we all have those emotions, right? So we something to just consider, right? What emotions we're allowed to have, right? What success looks like. And this is a hard one too, right? Oftentimes families and societies dictate what does success look like. And what should we hide, right? Do we hide turmoil in the family, right? We have that public face and we have the private face. And over time, we wear these identities so long that they really begin to feel natural. Right? It's just who we are, right? That's just who we are. Have you ever heard of that? Right? That's just Aunt Clara. That's how she is. Aunt Clara can change. I'll give you that. Give you that little spoiler at the end, right? You can change too. But the Buddha taught that clinging to identity and even positive identity leads to suffering. Now, how can that be? How can positive identity lead to suffering? Oftentimes we become arrogant, right? We end up belittling others. But understanding that whatever is impermanent is subject to suffering, right? Everything is impermanent, right? So, but we don't understand what does it really mean to be impermanent, right? It just means nothing lasts forever, right? What is brought about by a condition, right, will exist for a little bit, and then it will cease to exist. And so authenticity in Buddhism is not about perfecting a personality. It's about seeing clearly what arises and passes. And you don't become authentic by adding something, right? You become authentic by letting go of what is not true. Again, oftentimes we see and hear people being rude or crass, right, or confrontational to others. And they may say that I'm just being authentic. It's my authentic self. But is that truly them? Right? Is that truly any person? When we really dig down, right, is that truly anyone? And so the Buddha describes human experience through the five aggregates, right? The form, which is the body, feeling, right? Pleasant, unpleasant, or even neutral, right? Perception, right? Labeling and recognition. This is good, this is bad, this is neutral. Mental formations, thoughts, habits, emotions, and consciousness, which is simply the awareness of itself. Right? And he asked us to look carefully at each one and ask, is this permanent? Is this fully under my control? Is this truly who I am? And then he concluded, just as a chariot is made of parts, so too a person exists only by convention. So what does that mean? Only by convention? I mean, we certainly exist. I'm here, you're here, cats are here, dogs are here. 8 billion people on this planet are here, right? But we all have a bunch of little parts between us, right, that add up to us. So it's almost like there's that other analogy, parts of a table, right? You can have a disassembled table, but when does it become a table, right? Just because I have 4 legs and a top, right? Does it make it a table, or is it a table when it's constructed? And so having this insight can be deeply freeing, because if the self is not a fixed thing, then you don't have to protect it, defend it, or importantly, constantly prove it. You're allowed to change. And so that's often what people do, right? They constantly have to prove themselves. They constantly have to defend themselves, right? If somebody says something to them, they have to argue it, debate it, protect themselves, right? Without really realizing you're allowed to change, because that is impermanent. And so the Buddha taught mindfulness as that direct path to freedom, right? This is the direct path for the purification of beings, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, right? And so through mindfulness, we learn to observe experiences rather than identify with them. And so if we are feeling anxious, right, instead of saying to yourself, I am anxious, simply notice, right? Anxiety is present. Instead of I am broken, we simply notice pain is arising and it's changing. And so rephrasing these sentences, right? These how we think, right? That shift, rephrasing those shifts, it's subtle, right? But it's very powerful, because instead of identifying with anxiety, right, we're just noticing it. Instead of identifying with the pain, whatever it is, we just notice it. Same thing with joy, right? Or overwhelming a positive situation, right? That promotion, that new title, perhaps. Instead of allowing that to become an additional layer to our existence, we simply notice it. And so your authentic self is not the storm. It's the awareness that knows of the storm, right? So in this case, the storm, it could be a negative situation, could be a negative result, or it could be an advantageous or a positive one, right? So a storm can just be anything that is agitating to our emotions, that takes us from being balanced to a state of imbalance. And so compassion emerges when the self softens. Okay, when we loosen our grip on identity, something really beautiful, something really wonderful happens. Compassion arises naturally. Right? And why is that? Right? Because we are removing those layers of I need to be protected, I need to be defended, this is my identity. Right? We remove that and we allow our hearts to be open. So compassion arises naturally, right? When we allow that grip of identity to just kind of loosen, right? And hatred is never ended by hatred, right? By non-hatred alone is hatred ended. We can look at this phrase, this passage or verse for many different situations, right? But when we look at ourselves, we have to understand that the hatred of ourselves sometimes, right, is not sometimes, it's very destructive, right? And that's oftentimes why we have to why somebody may feel that they have to defend themselves, right? Defend their actions, right? But once we open our heart, open our Dharma heart, right? We understand that compassion will just naturally arise, right? So again, hatred, hatred is never ended by hatred, right? It's only by non-hatred, right, that hatred is ended, right? You can change that word hatred to anger. You can change the word hatred to violence, right? It's the opposite. So when we stop defending that rigid self, which is impermanent, right, we become more human, right? More understanding of ourselves and others. We become more patient with ourselves and others. We become more kind to ourselves and others, right? So authenticity is not self-centered, right? It's relational and it's responsive, right? Means we understand about ourselves what being authentic means, right? It's not violent, it's not rude, it's not egocentric, right? It's not arrogant, right? It's compassionate, it is empathetic, it is generous, it's not rigid, it's flexible, right? And so it relates to a situation and it responds with kindness and compassion and empathy. That's what your authenticity is, right? There's many ways to go about it, right? Just understanding that is what authenticity is. It's not rude or crass or hurtful to somebody else. So loving kindness and our authentic heart, right? Understanding that the Buddha taught loving kindness not as an obligation, right, but as an expression of our true nature. So that's your authenticity, right? Loving kindness. It's not an obligation. That is who we are, right? And in the Karanyata Metta Sutta, right, quotes that let one cultivate a boundless heart towards all beings. And that can be hard sometimes, right? Especially when we see all the turmoil and the violence and the aggression and the uncertainty, right, with what we're experiencing. Like, how do we have that boundless heart towards all beings? Well, we understand that the ones causing this agitation and this pain and suffering, right, they are experiencing a lot of suffering themselves. And so when we are no longer trapped by fear-based identities, the heart naturally opens, right? And this is not something you need to force. It's simply something that you allow, and that can be hard. So we find a lot of people who want to promote peace, but still yet hold anger and resentment and prejudices towards those that are trying to incite and instill that, scary uncertainties. It truthfully is. It is scary at times. But we have to allow that peace. This is where being that role model, right? That mindful role model comes into play, into existence, right? And so remembering that it's not something that you need to force, right? It's simply something that we have to allow. And that's a change that we have to make in ourselves. And we oftentimes expect others to change without us changing, right? But we are the ones that need to make that change as well. And so when we ask, who am I really? The Dharma simply and gently responds, look and let go. Let go of the identities, right, that you hold so valuable and so precious, right? Your titles, your station in life, your education, your socioeconomic status. Those are all impermanent, right? You have to let those layers dissipate, those layers that we have added to ourselves. So look and let go. So remembering that you are not your past, you are not your labels, and you are not your thoughts, right? You are the awareness that knows them. That's why it was important when we talked a few moments ago. Are we feeling it, or are we anxious, or do we notice that you are anxious? Because you're not always anxious, right? It's a condition. It's an emotional response that comes from a condition, sits with us for a little bit, hopefully just a little bit, right? And then just dissipates on its own. And so you are the awareness that knows those experiences. And so in the seen, there's only the seen, and that is the end of suffering. So think about in the seen, right? What you're able to see. There is only the seen, what you can see. And this is the end of suffering. So you are just simply looking at the experience. And so, if this teaching today, our time together, if this resonates with you, let us know. I would love to read and hear your comments. It's hard for me to sometimes look at the chat as these go along, but I will always respond to comments. So let us know, right? This is quite revolutionary, right? In a perception of, especially in a society of materialism, right? Society that promotes impermanence as something permanent. So let us know what you think. I'd love to hear it. And so, perfect. Very good. Thank you for spending some of your precious time with us this morning. Whether it was live or maybe perhaps you're watching on the replay. Thank you very much. And joining us to help nurture your own mindfulness practice. And maybe you learn something new. Give it a try. That's what the Buddha will ask us to do. Give it a try. If it works for you, cool. If it doesn't, maybe find something a little bit different. And so our next talk will be on February 2nd, again at 6:30 a.m. And it'll be the Dharma in discomfort, right? Embracing the middle path through challenge. I may work on that title a little bit, so it fits better on a thumbnail. But it'll really be exploring what's that middle path. Right? We have a lot of discomfort and a lot of agitation going on. So how do we find the middle path? And how do we walk that middle path during those times? Oh, Gus wants to say hi. Hello, baby. Say hi. And so, if you subscribe to our channel, wonderful. You are welcome to put that notification on. Just a reminder to join us. But it's every other Monday we do that. And so, with that, my friends, I wish you all a wonderful morning of peace, ease, and well-being. And again, we look forward to hearing from you. Many blessings to you all. Namo Buddhaya.